This is a recording of the Gemara that I didn't get a chance to do live, so I am doing it now on the Zoom. Today's Daf Amud is Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We are starting from Lamed Vav Amud Beis, about 3 lines up from the intermediate wide lines. The Gemara says pilpuli, talking about pepper. So the Gemara says pilpuli. What is the bracha that one makes on pepper? Rav Sheshes Omar Shahako. Rav Sheshes says that the bracha that you make is a shahako. Rava Omar loy klum. Rava says you don't have to make a bracha on pepper. V'ozda Rava l'taime, and Rava goes according to his reasoning. He goes so far as to say, Dan Rava kas pilpuli b'yom kippurei pater. If somebody's chewing pepper on Yom Kippur, he's pater. On certain peppers, you might not be alive after. You have a ghost pepper or something like that, you know? But Rav is saying in all seriousness that if somebody chewed pepper on Yom Kippur, Rashi explains, Kas pilpuli, chewing pepper is called Davar Sha'adam Eichel Shaloi Kedargai, Mikri Ksisa, anything that a person is chewing that's not a normative way of eating it. It's called ksisa. So people don't eat these kinds of peppers. But obviously, I'm talking about the regular peppers of goes into a salad. But we're talking about these kinds of spicy peppers. So Rav is saying not only do you not have to make a bracha, but since it's not a normative type of eating, you're potter even on Yom Kippur if you were to chew it. Kas zang v'libiyam kippurim potter, and also if somebody chewed zangul, also a type of ginger, would also be potter if they did so on Yom Kippur. So now the Gemara asks the question, for the Gemara, from what Rav is telling us, it sounds like this pepper, which Rav says you don't have to even make a bracha on it. And presumably the reason you don't have to make a bracha on it is because, as we've already explained, back in the beginning of the sixth parak, we already noted the Asloi Adam She'enem min Olam Hazeh B'lei Bracha, B'chol Enenem min Olam Hazeh B'lei Bracha Mal, anything that a person is going to have enough from in this world has to make a bracha. That's the svara that we feel that anything that's going to provide hana to somebody, they should make a bracha on it. But it's not necessarily the case that everything that one eats, one is going to always have hana from. For example, I ended up mentioning this actually a couple of days later. I alluded, or actually I did mention this, I think, when we did Daf Lamed Tes, and there's a thesis there on Daf Lamed Tes, and top thesis on the page of Batzalei Shiura. Shtais brought down this idea that it's Hainu Dafka Baruch Shel Achav, the Be'inan Shir, Baruch Shel Afanav, Afil Pachas Mikashir. The only time that we require a certain shear to make a bracha is the bracha achrona. But the bracha rishona, then you make a bracha even on less than a shear. Why? Because it's also to have hana in this world without a bracha. Whether it's with regards to eating or drinking. Now, the situation of water, so that I mentioned when I'm recording this, it's a few days ago, but in theory it was a few days from when this Amma was being done. So we know that when it comes to water, the Aruch HaShulchan writes in Archaim Reish Tzaddik Siman Reish Tzaddik Sifir Ches that if somebody's drinking water not for thirst, but he's drinking water because he has a umsa in his throat, right? It's choking him, or he has some sort of terrible, disgusting thing that he has to have, maybe like a medicine to take. In order to take the medicine, he has to take some water. So there is not having any hana whatsoever, since mayim has no tam. If you're not thirsty, and your throat's not having any hana from it, so you wouldn't have to make a bracha. And in a sense, perhaps that's what this kas pilpuli, Yom Kippurim, that we say is potter, or Rava says you don't even have to make a bracha, is that idea as well. It's not something that anybody has hana from this kind of a pepper, and so therefore one is potter for making a bracha, one is even potter uh, from karas on Yom Kippur. So we continue now in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, I have a question. The question is, we have a brayso that tells us, Meisvei, Hey Rabbi Meir Remer, Mimash Mashanem Varartem, Allah says, period, from the fact that the pasuk tells us that a fruit tree in its first 3 years, it's arlo, and Yedesh Eitz Meichel, don't I know that it's talking about a fruit tree? So what does it mean in the pasuk when it says Ki Saver La'aretz? When it tatem kol eitz Meichel v'araltem arlo says period. Obviously, you're talking about an Eitz Michael. Obviously, you're talking about a fruit tree. If you're talking about the Pirius, you're talking about the Paris. So, Frank W. Mayer, from the fact that I said Varatamala says Piri already, don't I already know that it's talking about an Eitz Michael? Why does the Torah have to specifically say it nonetheless? El Matam Eitz Michael. What is the reason that it says that the tree, the very bark, is an Eitz Michael, Havi Eitz Etam Eitz Period Shava, to include one of the things that the actual stalk and the fruit have the same type of a taste. Ve'zeu zeh pilpulin. What is that? That's pepper. So it includes pepper in the halachas of arla. Lamed chasha pilpulin chayavim ba'arla. Is that coming then to teach you that pilpulin has a din of arla? Ulamed chosh ein Eretz Yisrael chaser chlum. It also comes to teach that Eretz Yisrael is not missing anything. It has every type of thing in there. I like to make the joke that it has all the types of weather in one little tiny country. You can have the snow peaks and the Charmon and the hot beaches in Eilat all in the same day. You could travel. It's a tiny country, but it has everything in it. So Eretz shall live miskinus toicha balachem, a land without scarcity, be able to eat bread like sex like kobla. It's not missing anything. But the question then is that how could Rava say that on this pilpulin you don't have to make a bracha? On this pilpulin you're not chayiv kars if you eat it on Yom Kippur. Here we see very clearly that Varantam says period. This pasuk made it clear that we're talking about a fruit tree. We're talking about fruits, so we don't need to tell you the pasuk unitatem kol eitz meichel. I would know that from talking about the Paris. Elamai, the reason it did it is to include one type of a fruit, one type of a tree, where the Eitze Peri Shava, where the tree and the peri are the same, in the sense that they taste the same, and it's going to be chayiv and oil. And what's that? That's the pilpul. There are other Gemaras that talk about other trees that are potentially Eitze Peri Shava. For example, we have Gemaras in Sukkah about esrig, but for our purposes now, ultimately, the situation that we're in is that what we're seeing is that this pilpul gets a bracha of ha'etz. It's getting some sort of a bracha. So how could it be that Rava says it gets no bracha at all? On that, the Gemara answers like kasha havirit vasa b'yabeshta. Depends on whether or not you're dealing with something that is fresh, something that is dry. Something that is dried doesn't get the bracha. That's what Rav is telling us is pater and Yom Kippur. But if it was miritvasa, if it was fresh, if it was wet, then it would definitely get a bracha. There's no question about that. The Gemara now says something similar about the zangul. Says the Gemara Amri le Rabban le Mereimar, Kas zangul b'yom Kippur pater. The rabbis said to Meremar that this kazang, if somebody's chewing this ginger on Yom Kippur is pater. That's the opinion of Rava. Nevertheless, we know that Rava said that the ginger That comes from Hinduya. What is Hinduya? Not sure. We'll talk about that maybe in a second. Rava says that that's permitted. Rashi explains what does Sharia mean? It's permitted. Rashi says there's no issue of Bishul Nacharim or Gil Nacharim. There's no issues of like the guy could cook it because it's not really considered a food. So, V'amar Rava Hayim Musa the Asrim Bey Hinduya Sharia V'orchem Lebar Pradama. So Rava says that it's not have any issues of Bishul Nachrim or Gil Nachrim, but nevertheless, you still make a bracha on it in the sense that you make a Hadama. So this seems to be a contradiction with Rava. Before he said Kazan and Yom Kippur is Pater, now he's saying that this Himusha, which is coming from Hinduya, is Mutter, and you make a Bar Pradama. So it sounds like you do make a bracha. So again, the same answer. Depends if it's wet or dry. If it's wet, then you make a bracha. If it's dry, you do not make a bracha. Now, a couple of things. First, what is this Hinduya? Rashi tells us it's Kushian. Sounds like that's coming from the land of Kush, somewhere in Africa. And if you look in Rashi, Yuma Pei Aleph and Beis, Rashi over there also seems to suggest that that the what do you call this this Hinduya is the land of Kush. Also, if you look at Rashi in Kedushin Chav Beis and Beis, over there the Gemara Samar Behuda Hindia, and Rashi explains over there he's from the land of Kush. We also find him in Mabasha and Dalan Beis. Also look at Rashi in Yuma Lamadal Beis. Over there, the talks about the Kohen Gadol's clothing, and so he said on the big day love and Shalav Kohen Gadol with Sarayim, they were called Hinduyim Shal Shmonim Me'ezuz, and over there Rashi again says it was Eretz Kush, and Rashi's seems to be getting it from maybe perhaps the Tari Yenison, which is a pasuk there in Yirmiyah, Parakut Gimel. Pasuk Nun Gimel, maybe that's the source for Rashi. But the simple reading of what Hinduya is would sound like Hindu maybe or India, but that is not, certainly not the way that Rashi is understanding it. That was point number one. Point number two. What is this difference between Ritvasa and Yabeshta? The Tosfos then goes off to talk about some other things in terms of the way they're eaten, if they're normally eaten wet, dry, etc. So Tosfos says that in the Tosfos Beritva, Tosfos Ramaskim Beritva, not the Ritva, but rather Bertiva, right? When it's wet. So Bertiva can go in Litur Belaz Mevarchin Laber Priadama, Avo Yeveshta loy mevarchin alev, chin alochem b'zangvil. That's what we just said over here. She'kairin zanzibar, the belaz, and then Tosfos names a few other things, and Tosfos says that im mevarchin alev klal b'yabeshta. Again, when it's not normative to eat, when it's very dried out. Avol it shall kinamon. So it sounds like perhaps that's talking about cinnamon. Tosfos says you make a hadama, even when it's dried, because that's the normative way to eat it. We're going to see more about this in a few shiurim. And then Tosfos says something that is controversial and not agreed about by most Rishonim. Tosfos says v'al tzukar ro. Sounds like tzukar ro sounds like tzukar, which sounds like sugar. So Rashi says in Varchinim bar pri ha'etz kiyarim devashe. It sounds like the way Tosfos is understanding that sukkar is essentially that the stalk is a tree in the sense that it's perennial, in the sense that it comes back, so therefore it's ha'etz. Sugarcane doesn't actually grow any fruit. The stalk itself is sweet, or when you cook it, it's sweet. I'm not 100% sure exactly how that works, but if that is the case, that the normative way of eating it is only when it's cooked, we're going to see later on that there's an opinion of Rav Chizda that Rav Chizda says that there's a difference between Sigmar and Lam Chesma Beis, where Rav Chizda tells us that maybe there's a distinction between something in its normative state to be eaten um, when it's cooked versus when it's raw. Here it's cooked versus when here it's raw, fresh versus when it's dried. So maybe make different brachas on it. It sounds like from this thesis that thesis is suggesting that because sugar can be eaten raw and I guess it tastes sweet enough, that's considered normative and that's why it gets her eights. Though those who want to argue and say no, sugar would get a shahako, and why does sugar get a shehako? Because the normative way to eat it is only as sugar. If you are sort of chewing the cane, the stalk, it's not normal. Maybe it tastes some sweet, but it's not the normative way to eat it. And so since the normative way to eat it is to change it so much that it no longer looks like a plant at all, that's why it gets a shehako. Others might want to point out that maybe it should get a hadama because it doesn't have a fruit. What you're actually chewing is the stalk itself. So how could you say by a priha it's not a peri? So these are three different opinions on how you deal with the sugar. It's either ha'etz, it's a shahakel, or it is a hadama. Okay. In any event, the last thing that Taisu says is that there's a certain nut called a moscato, not a grape. So I'm not sure exactly what this moscato nut is. He says that the bracha to make is ha'etz. Shegam megan lechel beyovish. When it's dried out, people eat it, and so you make a ha'etz on that. That's the normative way to eat it. Okay, now we go to the next Gemara over here. The Gemara says as follows. Says the Gemara, Chavetz Kedera. So now we're about two lines up from the most wide lines in the bottom of the page. Chavetz Kedera v'chein daisa. What is a chavetz kedera? What's a daisa? So Rashi tells us that a chavetz kedera, some sort of a dish that they made that had flour, and it also had honey, and it had oil. Sounds nice, but not exactly sure what it is. V'chein daisa, daisa was some sort of crushed wheat that it was crushed in like a mortar and pestle kind of situation. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shakal Nebedvar. Rabbi Yehuda says you make a bracha of Shakal. Rav Kahana Omer Bar Minei Mezainis. Rabbi Kahana says you make a mezainis on this. So the Gemara now explains. Bid daisa greda. If we're just talking about the situation of daisa, meaning the crushed flour, or you take the wheat and you crushed it. So by daisa alone, everybody agrees that on crushed wheat you make a mezainis. Ki pligi b'daisa ke'en chavetz kedera. The dispute is when the dice is similar to the chavetz kedera. And the chavetz kedera we said was with kemach, and then you added in oil and honey. And the dice sounds like what we're talking about is, as Rashi tells us, dice again chavetz kedera l'kam l'farish lachiti the metavi b'isasa. Chiti the metavi ba'asisa v'yavul badhu duvshu v'avilu b'kedera. That you're taking these wheat kernels that you've crushed and you are mixing in it the oil and the honey, and again some sort of cooking of it. So it's similar to a chavetz kedera. So everyone's agreeing. The Gemara is telling us that when it comes to daisa alone, it's always mezainis. The question is by daisa, which is like a chavetz kedera. That's the question. Rabbi Yehuda on Mashakel Savadov Sheikar. Yehuda says you make a shahaga because really the honey is the main point. If Kanan Berman and Mizana Savar Smida Iker. And Rikiva, I'm sorry, if Kahana holds that you make a Mizanis because he holds the flower is the main point. So Rav Yosef, Kavazed Rav Kahana Mistaver, it makes sense to go with Rav Kahana. Why? The Rav Shmuel Damar Tavak Kol Sheish Mechamesh Saminim Mevarchein Olav Berman and Mizanis. Because you have the opinion of Rav and Shmuel hold that whatever is from the five minim, meaning the five different types of grain. Allah is to make a mezainis. We've already had this before. But what that would then mean is that this Gemara, which has nothing to do with the pepper Gemara per se, except for the fact that what we're trying to do is figure out what is the appropriate bracha on something. And the Gemara is giving a number of examples of that throughout. So the Gemara is saying that really on dice everyone agrees that's mezainis. That's plain. It's plain just crushed wheat. But when the dice says ke'ain, the chavetz kedera, then we have a question. Why do we have a question? We have a question because either you could look at the dvash as being the main, in which case you would make a shakral, or you could look at the flour, the crushed wheat, as the main, and that is the reason that you make a mezemus. Should point out that Taisus says, and we're going to have another Taisus today that says a similar thing. Taisus says in Kol Sheyesh by Mechamish Tamin Mevarchin Allah Bar Minim Mezainas. So this is coming to explain Rav and Shmuel's Shita. So towards the end of Taisus, Taisus says, V'chein l'toich shgedim she'osim l'chaylo. If you're making some sort of nut food for somebody who's ill, and ma'asin aser kadesh yisrael halev. If you're doing it so the person should be able to be filled up, so then tzarich levarach b'aminim zaynis. V'im l'dagig ba'alma. But if, right, because then the flour that you're putting into this dish, right, if you're putting flour into a dish, but you're not doing it for the purposes of the flour, you're doing it in order to make the dish more palatable to somebody who's ill, so then you would make וכן כשנעשן קמח ותוך פלן, ותוך הדשן והקרישים, וכן ותוך שקדים, שעשן וחלם מייסן נעשן כדי שיסן הלב, אז צריך לברך בהם מזנס. So then you have to make a mezainis because you put in the flour, and that's fundamental to this dish. But the Davik Ba'alma and it's tzarich levarach. If you're just there to sort of hold things together a little bit, but it's really not the main point, so you don't have to make a mezainis. And tzarich levarach from Berman and mezainis. So this is, so how do you deal with the situation where you're not sure what bracha to make on something? The taiv, lahachmer, gam oy v'soicha su'uda la'acha berachas ha'maitzi pater min manavsha. So what a person should really do is, eat it after you made hamaitzi, and then you don't have any issues of what bracha to make on something. Now the one wants to explore further this Ram and Shmuel idea that you anything from the five types of grain gets a mezainis. Says the Margufa Rav Shmuel Damiter Vayu. Rav and Shmuel say together, Kol Sheyesh Mechamesh Samin Nevarchim Lavar Minim Mezainis. Whatever has from the five types of grain you get a mezainis if you eat it. We have another saying that Rav Shmuel say together that whatever has in it anything from the five grains gets a mezainis. So tzrich, we need both of these statements of Rav and Shmuel. The Yashmin Kol Shehu, because if I just had this statement where Rav and Shmuel say that any mixture that has any bit of the chamesh samina gets a mezainis, then have mina mishum de eisa be'ena. That would be because it's be'en. It's still in its state, in its natural state. So that's why it gets a mezainis. How I did tarevis, but if it was fully mixed in, if it was mixed into something else, anything that is from the chamesh samina be'en, so it gets a mezainis. If I only had that statement, I wouldn't know that if it was mixed into something else and it wasn't be'en in anyone, I didn't have it anymore in an obvious, conspicuous way, and now it was mixed into other things. So then I would think you're not going to get not going to have to make a mezainis. Kamash Malan, Kol Sheyesh Bo. That's why I have the other statement of Rav and Shmuel that says whatever has in it anything from the Chamesh Saminin, nevertheless still gets a mezainis. V'yashmin and Kol Sheyeshmin, if I had the statement of Rav and Shmuel that anything that has in it any aspect of the five types of grain gets a mezainis have a min Kol Sheyesh Chamesh Saminin en. That only something that has in it from the five species gets a bracha of mezainis. Aval iris v'doichen, but iris v'doichen meaning this sort of rice or millet that doesn't get a bracha mezainis. Why? Mishum da'idei ta'areves, because it is being put in as a mixture, right? So kol the bracha mezainis is only on kol sheyesh by mechamesh saminin, but aris v'doichen it's not going to get a bracha mezainis. Why? Because it is included in this statement of Rav and Shmuel that the only things that get a mezainis are things that have in it aspects of the five grains. Something that doesn't have in the tarevis mixture from the five grains doesn't get a mezainis. But iris adaychin, if it was just standing be'en, it was just standing alone, not as part of a tarevis, then I might think that you would still make a mezainis on that. Aval Aretz V'Doichen loy mishum da'idei tarevis. The reason why Aretz V'Doichen don't get a mezainis is because it's being mixed into a wider mixture. Aval Esa be'ene. But if it was, in fact, if you were eating the rice or the millet alone, so name afil Aretz V'Doichen na mevarchen lav name mezainis, then I would think maybe you do get a mezainis on that. Kamash Malan kol shem mechamesh taminim hu mevarchen lav name mezainis. That teaches me that no, the only things that get a mezainis are the things that are from the five minim itself, only the things that are from the five species. But Aretz V'Doichen do not. Kamashman kol shemechamish taminim hu nevarchen lavar minim mezainis. Lafu ki Aretz V'Doichen lafilu esav be'eni lo mevarchen bar minim mezainis. You do not ever make a bracha on Aretz V'Doichen. You do not ever make a bracha of mezainis on Aretz V'Doichen. Why is that? Because we don't consider that a grain from the five grains. Says the Gemara, is that true? Is that true that an arz v'doichen you do not make on it a mezainis? Do you really hold by that? If somebody brought in front of you a bread made out of rice or millet, you make on it the same bracha as one would for the ma'aseh kedera, something that's cooked in a pot. Right, what is a ma'aseh kedera? Talking about a situation, ma'aseh kedera is something that was made from the five grains. But my God, ma'aseh kedera, Tanya, what do we learn about ma'aseh kedera? In the beginning, you make a mezainis, and then you make a halamechia. So how could you suggest that on Arz V'Doichen you don't make a mezainis, then on Arz V'Doichen it is being excluded? Rav and Shmuel's statements. You see over here that somebody's bringing you past Arz or past Doichen. You make a bracha before and after you eat it. What's the bracha? We said the bracha is like the ma'aseh kedera. What's the bracha of the ma'aseh kedera? It's a mezainis and then al mechia. So too, by Arz V'Doichen you have to make a mezainis and then al mechia. So how could you say that, based upon Rav's statements, that we're coming to exclude Arz V'Doichen that doesn't get a mezainis? You see clearly it does. Says the Gemara, K'ma'aseh kedera v'lo k'ma'aseh kedera. It is like a ma'aseh kedera in one sense, but it is not like a ma'aseh kedera in another sense. K'ma'aseh kedera, it's like the ma'aseh kedera in one sense, because you make a bracha on it at the beginning and at the end, like anything else. Well, we like ma'aseh kedera, but it's not like the ma'aseh kedera. In what sense? Either ma'aseh kedera b'chila bar minay mezainis b'sayif bracha akas min gimel. Because by ma'aseh kedera, what's the bracha that you make at the beginning? You make a mezainis. What's the bracha you make at the end? You make a halamechia. V'yilohacha. But over here, by what? Over here, by the situation of Arz V'Doichen. In the beginning, you make a shahakal. L'b'sayif bracha l'b'sayif bar nefashos rabbis v'chasrein al kol masha bara. and at the end you make a bar nefashos. So what we thought we had a strong question to ask on the Aris V'Deichen that maybe you should make him a Zionist, we end up knocking off that question, and we say that no, in fact, it could very well be that in the Aris V'Deichen you are making a Shahakol, not a Zionist. So at this stage of the Gemara, these two statements of Rav, one of them are utilized to knock out Aris V'Deichen, but that's not part of the grain family. It doesn't get a Zionist. And instead it gets Adama and Shahako. Continues the Gemara. The Iris Lav Maisa Kedera who? You're saying that there is an aspect of Iris that is not like a Maisa Kedera, where the Maisa Kedera gets a Mazinus and Al Michya, but the Iris Deichen is only getting a Hadama and a Bar Nefashis. You're saying it's not like the Maisa Kedera? In that sense, yes, it's like a Maisa Kedera in the sense that you make a Brachot Chil of a Saif, a Brachot Yeshera and a Achrayna, but it's not the same one as from the Chamesh Mini Dagon. So Fred Gemara, V'aris Lav Maisa Kedera who? Vatanya Boilan Abraisa Elohim Maisa Kedera. What is the Maisa Kedera? Chilka. Again, well, I have to look at Rashi to understand what it means. Chilka Targis Silas Zaras V'arsan V'Iris. What are these? There's various different ways of cutting wheat, right? The kernels. So chilka is you cut it into two, targis is into three, zaris into four, arsan into five pieces, I guess. And so what we say in this brayso is that on all of these different things you make a bracha. What bracha do you make? Well, Tanya Elohim Ma'asikadera, right? The bracha you're gonna make is a mezainis because these are Ma'asikadera, right? Any one of these ways of cutting up the wheat kernels is gonna get a mezainis. Ve'Elohim Ma'asikadera Chilka Targa Sel Zaras V'Arsan, and what's the last one? V'Ayres, and Ayres also is part of Ma'asikadera, which means then it also is gonna get a mezainis, which means then that it's not gonna be knocked out from Rav and Shmuel. This is against Rav and Shmuel. Says the more no. Hamani Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri he. This man the Amr Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. The tiny Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. Aimer Arz ben Dagan is a famous Gemara in Pesachim. That Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri says there in Lamed Hey that Iris is a type of grain. L'chayav al chimutzei karetz. You're chayav on if it goes for more than 18 minutes, it becomes chametz. And a person is also able to be Yitzis Chiv on Pesach eating matzah with rice matzah. Avarabanan loy, but the rabbis disagreed. So in other words, at this stage of the Gemara is asking, how do you know ours? How do you know ours is not a Maisa Kedera? Ours should be Maisa Kedera. How do I see ours a Maisa Kedera? Because I have a brayso that teaches us that Maisa Kedera includes Chilka, Targa, So, Zaras, Arsan, and Iris. No, so it's not a raya. It's not a raya that Aris and Maisa Gedei and therefore should get a mezainis. It could be this Mishnah, this Bryce is going from Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri is very famous for Pesachim, where he says that in Iris you're able to be yaitza on your chiv of matzah, and if you let it rise, you'll be over on chametz. And the rabbis disagree. So what's it going to come out? You're going to come that the only one who holds that Iris is like Ma'aseh Kedera is the Shita of Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, who we don't pass can like. But according to rabbis, it's not like a Ma'aseh Kedera. And if it's not like a Ma'aseh Kedera, like we said before, we get a Shahakal and a Bar Nefashis rabbis. Says is that really true of Rabbanan Loi? The rabbis really hold that there's no such thing as Eretz V'Derech being a Ma'aseh Kedera and therefore getting a bracha mizainis. But we have another brayso that curses somebody who is chewing a wheat kernel. The halacha is he makes a hadama. Tachana if he ground it down and he baked it afal bishla, and then he after baking bread he then cooks the bread. So bisman shapru says kayamayis b'tchilam avachla mitzalachem ratzul b'sevim avachla gimel brachas. If the pieces are kayamos, if the pieces are extant, then you make a hamotzi, and on the side you make a benching. In haprusa is kayamos, but if the pieces are not intact, if the pieces are no, it doesn't look like bread anymore. So then, imena prusis kayamas b'tchilin v'archan alav bar minim mezainis. Then you would end up making a mezainis. Well, b'soyev mevarch alav baracha achas me'ein shalish. Then afterwards you would make an al hamichya. So in other words, from this first part of this brisa, we don't see what it has to do with Aris V'Daychem. However, the brisa continues and it says HaKaisa says Aires, but somebody who then is chewing on the rice, Mevarch alav bar Adama. He has to make on an hadama. Tachan if he ground it, afan then he baked and made bread. He made rice bread. Ubishlan then he cooks it off bishar prusas kayamais. Even though the the pieces are uh, intact, they're still able to be noticed. Nevertheless, nevertheless, still make on it a bracha of mezainis. Bracha achas me'in shalosh, and afterwards you make an al michya. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. You're talking about rice, and you say that in certain situations you have to make a mezainis, and then in certain situations that we're saying that you make a mezainis, you're also going to have to make an al michya. This is 1 second. Who is this going like? Mani. Elam Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. If you're going to say it's Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, Dam Aris min Dagan, who when he says that Aris is a type of grain, and he goes all the way. He holds that if you were to bake rice, you gotta make a hamaitzi. Now it's nothing suffice to just the mezainis. So it can't go to Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri because not only do you need to make a hamaitzi, but you also have to bench. Says the Gemara, Elam Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, he the Amar Aris ben Dagan, who Elam Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, he the Amar Aris ben Dagan, who hamaitzi lechem and Aris, or shlosh brachas, but you also need to bench, and you need to make a hamaitzi. So, shlosh brachas by bruchin, you have to bench. So there's no way that this could be Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, Elam lav Rabbanan, it has to be Rabbanan. And you see what the rabbis say, you don't make a shahako, right, you don't make a hadama. According to the rabbis, if you were to be in a situation where you took the rice and you were taking it, you baked it, and you cooked it, you would make a mezainis, and then you would make al mechia. So that can't be Rabbi Yechon because he would say in that situation you make a hamaitzi. Allah Rabban, it must be the seat of the Rabbanan, Tiyufta, the Rav Shmuel, Tiyufta. And this is a question of Rav and Shmuel, because Rav and Shmuel told us that what's the reason why we have Kol Sheyesh and Kol Shehu in relation to the Chamesh Aminin. So he said, this is to teach you that if we just said Kol Sheyesh anything that has any aspect of the Chamesh Aminin Dagan, that's when you say Mezainis. But something that just has, an aspect of iris and an aspect of rice and some mixture, it wouldn't, that's when we're saying that it's being knocked out, and you wouldn't make a bracha mazanis. But if it was intact, if you just had a piece of rice, right, just regular rice or millet, wasn't part of any tyravis, so then you for sure should make a mazanis. And on that we said no. That's what now it's teaching you, that you only make mazanis on kol shehu mechamesh saminin. And since this is not mechamesh saminin, you don't make a mazanis on it. So that stage of the Gemara, what we came out with is essentially saying that rice doesn't get a mezainis, and now we see that you do. We have a position where rice is for sure getting a mezainis, not getting a hamash like brecha menuri, it's getting a mezainis. So who must hold that it gets a mezainis? It must be the rabbis. And so if the rabbis hold that it gets a mezainis, the whole lima that we had of needing kol sheyesh by kol shu is not necessary anymore, because it's not teaching you this thing about the iris. It's not teaching you that iris is in fact not able to get a mezainis, because you see it does get a mezainis. So since it's not teaching me anything, so it's basically it's upslugged, we're throwing it away. Taisus and Rabbi point out that we're not throwing away the entirety of Rav and Shmuel's drasha. So let's look at the Taisus, where Taisus says Tiyufta the Rav and Shmuel, skipping a few Taisus in for the moment. So Taisus says Tiyufta the Rav and Shmuel bit iris. When it comes to the rice, that's when Rav and Shmuel are upslugged. But it was not an upshlag on Deichen. We didn't talk about Deichen. We only talked about iris. So the Gemara says, "Ve'efshir dahabi hilchos hakavasayil." Maybe the halacha still like Rav and Shmuel when it comes to deichen, when it comes to millet. V'lo mivarchin ala bar minim zenis. And maybe on those things you wouldn't make this millet, you wouldn't make a mezainis on it. That's Taisus. If you look at the page before Lam Vav and Beis, at least the Magamor Lam Vav and Beis, the Rabbeinu Chanan on the bottom says, "V'afagav di Tais for Rav Shmuel." Even though Ram and Shmuel were both upshlag, lo Tais for Elba Eris. They were only upshlag with regards to Eris. That Eris can still be a mezainis. It's real that I feel alone because Ram and Shmuel felt that Iris is even in their original state, they're not going to get mezainis. We asked on the brisa later on that we just did that would make it seem clear that in Uriz you in fact do make a mezainis. So that were Abshlag Ram and Shmuel. Aval b'taroivis chamesh aminim. Taisus said that the reason the Ram and Shmuel agree and are not Abshlag fully is for the case of Doichen. According to the Rabbeinu Chanaz, another reason. Aris was Abshlag, but how is Aris Abshlag? Only the situation of Be'en, says Taisvis. However, with regards to the Tarevis of the Chamesh Taminim, Lenin Chudivram, the Chelchus Lakavasayim, Varchim Barmanim Zesh, you have a Tarevis of Aris or Daichen, then you would make a Mazinus on it. It's only when it's Be'en that Ram Shmuel said that you don't get a mezainis. I'm sorry, I didn't say that 100%. So according to Ram and Shmuel, by Eirez v'deichen, you do not get a mezainis when it's be'en, and you do not get a bracha of right. You do not get a bracha of a mezainis only when it's be'en. Ram and Shmuel felt that the Gemara pointed out that these two statements of Ram and Shmuel taught us that Erz v'deichen, when they are tarevis, they don't get a bracha of mezainis, but when they're be'en, maybe they do. And then now we and that's why you need to have the other statement of Ram and Shmuel to say that they do not. And now we're saying that this new brisa teaches us that Erz not talking about deichen, but Erz when it's be'en gets a mezainis. That would be a contradiction to Rav and Shmuel. Says Rabbeinu Chananel, that part of what their statement was remains correct. That is to say, the first aspect, that is any tarevis that is chamesh minim gets a mezainis. So when we upslugging Rav and Shmuel, we're not upslugging them in its entirety. Either according to Taisus, the halacha will remain the same by Doichen, in which case Doichen doesn't get a mezainis when it's be'en. When we're not talking about Doichen, but with regards to Eres, while Ram Shmuel Abshlag and Eres Doichen, when you make it into bread, it does get a mezainis. Nevertheless, the first part of Ram Shmuel, the first lima that we learned from these two statements of Ram and Shmuel, of Kol Sheyesh Bo and Kol Shehu, the first statement was fundamentally that even on Yidei Tareves, you're gonna still make him a Zionist. That remains the case. That remains the case nowadays as well. We just have to run through a couple of other Taisus in here on the page. So Taisus tells us that Taisus tells us over here that Bar Nefashos Rabbis V'Chasrein in the top Taisus. So Taisus says, right, it's not possible to live without bread and water. Whatever's in the world that Hashem created in order for humanity to be able to survive, which includes bread and water. But there are other things that if Hashem didn't create the world with them, the world could still survive. Okay, why? Because these things were only created for the pleasure of man. And Taisus gives an example. Like apples. Apples are there for the tining of humanity. It's not there to be a basic necessity. Basic necessity is bread and water. Apples are tainug. And other similar things to this. Messiah Baruch Elamim. We're shouting Baruch Ato Hashem Chelam. Difference in the type of bracha at the end of Bar Nefashos. Um, Rashi says that Erez is rice. Um, and what do you call? Actually, Rashi says the word mill, like sounds probably more like millet. Taisa says the Rashi says Erez is mill, and then he says Yesh Farshim Rizzo, which sounds like rice. Well, Hai Pirusha Yesh Farsh the Derchem Hainu mill, and according to that, Derchem becomes the millet, and Erez is the rice. So either way, according to Rashi, Erez is the millet, and the Derchem is penance. According to Taisus, maybe it's different. Either way, um, we have now done all of the Taisus. Okay, continues the Gemara. So where are we right now? We've upshlugged this aspect of the limit of Rav and Shmuel. That is to say, according to Rav and Shmuel, which we do hold the halacha, whatever has in it from the Chamesh Mina Dagan, anything that from the Chamesh Mina Dagan and of course we're making a mezainis, that's not a question. If you made it into bread, you make, um, depending on the situation of what you're eating. Are you eating flour? Are you eating the kernels? We're not getting into that. You can make a hadama, mezainis, hamaitzi. Right? Rav and Shmuel's basic idea was that whatever's from the Chamesh Minin is going to get a mezainis. What is that situation? Even if it's in a tarabis, even if it's in a mixture, it's still going to get a mezenis. That Rav and Shmuel is not upshlag. That still remains a halacha. Now we continue going. Continues the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows: Amar Mar Kaises es achita mevarchel abar priadama. Somebody's chewing wheat. The halacha is they make a hadama. What do you mean he's chewing wheat? It's obviously not the normative way to eat it, so you're not making a mezainis. You haven't made it into flour yet. You haven't baked it. You haven't done anything with it. You're just chewing kernels of wheat. So the halach is you make adama. So the Gemara asks, "Vatanya barmine zerayim." We see that you're supposed to make a different bracha of Hashem creating the various zerayim. So the Gemara answers, "No, like kasher Rehuda Rabbanan." There's a difference between Rehuda and the Rabbanan. The Tanam Halayivakas and Bar Adam, Rehuda and Barmine B'Sham. Right? We had this already in the mission, in the beginning of the sixth parak. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you make specific bracha on Yerakos. You make a bracha bar b'nei Deshoyim, and the Chacham disagree to say everything gets a bar b'nei Adama. Okay, now we're going to back to a minute again to explore the Eires. To explore the rice or the millet, whatever it is. Amar ma'akaises es ha'eires mevarech alav bar if somebody's chewing on the rice, the halach is he makes a hadama. Tachanai, if he ground it, afoy, then he bakes it into bread. Ubishl, then he cooked it. So afish aprusas kayamas betchila mavarch alav b'nei mezen. Said even though the pieces are still effectively able to be seen, the halacha is you make on it a mezenis and you make a bracha achmin shosh and you make a halamechia. Fathi Gemara Vatani Lo B'Sefer Lekum. We have a brayse that says then you don't make any bracha. Rashi explains to us doesn't mean you don't make any bracha. What it by definition means is that you're not making the bracha of alamechia. The bracha that you're making is the bracha of bar nefashis. So it sounds like it's a stira. Do you make a bar nefashis or do you make an alamechia? There's no no debate. It's just whose opinion. Either it's Rabbi Gamliel or it's the Rabbanan. The Tanya. We have a brayse that tells us exactly how Rabbi Gamliel Shalish Bracha is whatever is from the seven minim. Meaning we're not talking about the five minim of grain. We're talking about the seven minim, meaning the seven eretz chit to serve. Get from the agreement eretz Shem and Dvash. The what's from the Shavas Haminim. So we're going to Li'Omer Shalish Bracha is Chachamim Bracha Achmin Shalish. We're going to said you could bench after them because remember look at the pasuk in Parsha Eikev the Chalas of the Rak. It sounds like it's talking about the Shivas Haminim. And it continues the Gemara, but the Chacham disagreed. The Chachamim Bracha Achmin Shalish. You say just like Al Mechia. You don't bench when you have from the Shivas Haminim. It was a time when the Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis were sitting in some attic in Yericho, and they brought in front of them these kinds of dates, and they ate them. V'achlu, and the rabbis ate them. And that's what Gamliel Rishus to Rabbi Akiva levarach. And Gamliel gave Rabbi Akiva the Rishus to bench. So what did he do? Kafas uvarich. Rabbi Akiva brach asan shalosh. Rabbi Akiva instead went and made it al mechia. Rabbi Gamliel Akiva must have to machnas v'resh ben hamachlekes. He asked him, why are you constantly putting your head into the machlekes and getting yourself into trouble? Right? For how long are you going to be doing this? So Amalei Rabbeinu, af b'shato emer kach v'chaverecha emer kain. Even though you said this, and meaning that you make them as a full benching afterwards, but the rabbis disagree. They say you only make alam mechya. So even though you say like this and your friends say like that, then you teach us then you teach us that you go with the rabbim. Since you go with the rabbim, so stop, hacking at Chinik about the fact that I made al mechia. I made al mechia because the majority disagrees with you, and we have to go with the majority. The Taisus here, a kaisis chita tzarach levarchel bar b'adama, somebody's chewing wheat has to make a hadama. Taisus points out, we talked about the flour of wheat the other week, and we said that on the kimcha of chita, we said you have to make a hadama. So for sure, on the kernel of wheat, you make a hadama. Rav Nachman disagreed. Rav Menachem would say that because it was changed very much from what it was started out with, it only gets a shakal. This was the Gemara that we had on the Lamed Vav and Aleph. So Taisus continues, and Taisus says, the question was, what do you make afterwards? Do you make al mechir or not? It sound like you make a bracha of al hadama, right, which is not our version of the al mechir. So let ashkam berachas al mechir v'al kalkola, ela hecha devarach alayo b'reisha kain machila. We don't have that. We don't have a situation where you make some sort of an al mechir, which we're calling al hadama, if you didn't start out with mezenos first. So according to the rabbis who are disagreeing with the approach of who are disagreeing with the approach of Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel is going to say that you're making a full benching, and we're saying no, you just make a bracha achas min shalosh. How does that sound like? So we thought maybe what the bracha is al hadama. Rabbeinu Tam higia b'machzor shel. Rabbeinu Tam changed his gears in his machzor to say al hadama pir hadama. But then he went back and changed his mind. We never find such a blessing anywhere. We have to skip a bunch of the Taisus, go to the end. The Mir and Marie Taisus tells us Sheish Sapi Shemach Hacham Kaila Lebahud Min Dagan so pass Hacham and Rach Axman and Shalish. The Nachan Lahachmer Taisus again similar to what we saw already in Laman Vav and Beis. In a situation somebody's not sure about the brach, what to make. Right, obviously trying to know, but if you don't, you shouldn't eat, for example, cooked wheat or other parched grains, except during the meal. Because then for sure, Berachas Hamazon is going to be pater on whatever the questions are exactly what the right bracha achrona should be. If it's so long as it hasn't been fully destroyed, this law would apply. So what do we see from this Gemara over here? We see that somebody who's kaises iris, we thought, oh, maybe this is going to be a challenge. So we said no. Somebody's kaises and iris makes the adama, and if the proof, and after he bakes it, and then he cooks it, if the proofs are kayamas, he's going to make a mezainis. And that is a challenge to Rav and Shmuel, so they fall away. Now they end up saying, okay, so what if somebody's chewing the rice, so he makes a hadam. But then if he bakes it, so then the halach was that he got him a zaynis. But we have another place that and he makes alamachim. But we have another place that says that he doesn't make, maybe he makes a mezainis going in, but he makes a burn nefashis on the way out. So let's say so there's the Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, you make a halamachya, and according to um, um, according to Rabbi Gamliel, you make a you bench, and according to the rabbis, no, you make an al hamichya. So the Gemara had asked, the Gemara had asked, um, the Amar Mar crisis. And so Erez Baruch Lo Bar Pradam talking about Afa Bishla Afu Shabbos Kemas B'Chum Baruch Lo Bar Minim Zosef Baruch Hasmin Shalish. The question was, but we see another one says L'Bosef Lo Klum. So if this is not a question, I'm going to leave a Rabbanon. One is Gamliel, one is Rabbanon. Rabbi Gamliel would hold that you have to bench, and according to the rabbis, you just have to make a bracha achas me'ein shalish. And so therefore, this brisa that teaches us whatever's in the Shivas Aminim gets a full benching, and according to the Chachamim, gets an al mechiyam, or it gets an al eitz. So what we see from here is that according to the Chachamim, you are supposed to be making according to the Chachamim, you're supposed to be making a bracha achas mein shalish, just an al mechila, whereas according to Rabbi Gamliel, you got to make a full benching. So when we have our question about somebody who's being teichen the iris, that the prusas are kayamais, so now we understand that the man Amar who said the bracha achas mein shalish, right, would be Rabbi Gamliel, and the one who's saying that you're making the bar nefashis would be the position of the Rabbanan. We'll stop over here and finish the rest of the Gemara tomorrow.